You've been following the incredibly dense, bizarre lore of five Starcle men for a long time. You know the history, right? But lately, you've probably noticed the creator of the band, Luke, doing something that feels like a massive, almost incomprehensible contradiction to everything FSM stands for.
Right, because he's basically taking the band's entire archival history. I mean, the music, the art, the lore, all of it.
And feeding it into artificial intelligence.
Yeah, he is essentially deconstructing his own life's work to churn out these AI-generated podcasts. And they analyze FSM from all these various academic and scientific frameworks.
Imagine digging up your most precious childhood time capsule, but instead of just sitting with the nostalgia of the faded Polaroids, you feed them into a digital kaleidoscope.
That's a really good way to put it.
You're purposefully breaking down your own human history to see what new alien patterns emerge from the pieces. But the tension here is that FSM fans absolutely hate AI.
Oh, they despise it.
And Luke himself comes from a staunchly leftist, democratic, socialist background. So the central question we are exploring today is, why is a working class DIY artist using the very technology that his political allies are actively trying to stop?
To map out this contradiction, we're cross-referencing two incredibly distinct sources today. First, we have the massive FSM timeline and database.
Which is just a beast of a document.
It really is. It chronicles Luke's life from his 1970s California roots all the way to his PhD in neuroscience. And then we are colliding that with a recent article from the progressive publication Jacobin.
Right, the one detailing the legislative effort by Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to put an emergency halt on AI development.
Exactly. And just as a quick side note for you listening, because we are looking at specific legislation from progressive politicians and analysis from Jacobin, we are diving into some highly polarized political frameworks today. We have to do this to understand the precise lens through which Luke's own fans and political peers are currently judging him.
The central dilemma for you to consider is whether Luke should heed the warnings of progressive leaders and cease his AI experiments entirely.
Or, and this is the really wild part, if this technology is actually the ultimate logical fulfillment of FSM's postmodern scientific aesthetic.
So if you read that Jacobin piece, it paints a bleak picture of what this technology fundamentally is. It centers on the Artificial Intelligence Data Center Moratorium Act proposed by Sanders and AOC.
Yeah, and the source material essentially characterizes AI as a hungry species designed to hollow out the working class.
How does the legislation actually quantify that threat? Because they throw out some massive numbers.
They do. The numbers compiled by Sanders' staff project that AI-driven automation could destroy nearly 100 million jobs within a decade.
100 million, that is staggering.
And the legislation frames this not as an accidental side effect of progress, but as a deliberate wealth transfer. The article points out that this technology is controlled by a very specific billionaire class.
Right, they name names: Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Ellison.
Exactly. Sanders argues these figures are investing in AI to dramatically increase their own wealth and power at the expense of working families, noting that 60% of people are already living paycheck to paycheck.
The quotes from the tech executives in the article really bolster that argument too. You have Elon Musk predicting that none of us will have a job, framing human labor as a future, quote, hobby.
Which is just a wild thing to say out loud.
Right. And then Larry Ellison envisioning an AI surveillance state where citizens are kept on their best behavior because the AI is constantly recording and analyzing everything they do. That is a straight up panopticon.
It's a profound level of control. And it's not just about labor and surveillance either. The article emphasizes the devastating physical toll of this hungry species.
The infrastructure required is insane.
Yeah, these AI data centers require staggering infrastructure. Meta is planning a facility that Zuckerberg boasted would rival Manhattan in size.
Wow, Manhattan.
The source details how these server farms are siphoning millions of gallons of municipal water daily just for cooling. They emit incessant jet engine level noise pollution from industrial air chillers.
I read that part, yeah. And they demand multi-billion-dollar electrical grid upgrades that local residents end up subsidizing.
So it's abstracting resources on a planetary scale.
The historical comparison the source makes here is crucial for understanding the leftist perspective. The article compares the promises of the AI revolution to the promises of NAFTA in the 1990s.
Oh, that's a really interesting parallel.
Yeah, because back then, the establishment promised NAFTA would usher in an era of shared wealth. But the reality was shuttered American factories, jobs moved overseas, and workers forced into a low-wage gig economy where collective organizing is practically impossible.
Corporate-led innovations routinely backfire on the working class.
Which brings into sharp focus why Luke's fans would feel so betrayed. If AI is fundamentally framed as a tool for corporate surveillance, labor extraction, and resource monopolization.
It's the absolute antithesis of independent underground art.
Exactly. When you map that level of corporate monopolization onto a guy whose dad was a Teamster union driver, the cognitive dissonance is deafening.
It really is.
Why is a guy raised on union labor and DIY cassette tapes handing his life's work over to a technology designed to make human labor a hobby? Let's actually look at the FSM timeline.
Let's do it. Luke's background is steeped deeply in working class labor and DIY counterculture. The archive paints a vivid picture of his roots in Acton and Lancaster, California.
Yeah, his father, Dan, was a Vietnam veteran who experienced atrocities that left him with mild PTSD.
Dan was a rebellious, anti-authoritarian biker who raced off-road buggies in the Mojave Desert, worked as an auto mechanic, and eventually became a truck-driving teamster in Hollywood.
Representing literal union labor.
Exactly. And Luke's mother, Doris, was a 1960s flower child turned feminist literature student.
The Foundation doesn't get more working class and countercultural than that. And when Luke and his childhood friend Glenn Hobbs started Five Starcle Men, they built it entirely out of raw, tactile, human creativity.
They met in the 5th grade, right? As paper airplane buddies.
Yeah, paper airplane buddies.
Yeah.
FSM was born out of Xerox tape covers, hand-painted wooden cutouts they called Starcles, delay pedals, and 4-track synthesizers.
They were given at punk rock house parties in the Lancaster Desert, drinking Robitussin and mailing out physical cassette tapes.
It was the epitome of do-it-yourself underground art. A deeply human connection between two friends experimenting with atonal sounds and psychedelic experiences.
So by taking all of this raw human history, this deeply personal art, and feeding it into an AI to generate these analytical FSM podcasts, Luke seems to be acting as the very job-killing corporate machine Bernie and AOC are warning about.
He is literally replacing the human artist himself with an algorithm.
If you start reading the timeline of the 1990s, that conclusion is undeniable. But the narrative completely shifts when we examine the second half of Luke's timeline.
Right, because he didn't just stay a punk rocker in the desert.
No, he spent years in academia and earned a PhD in neuroscience. The database lists his rigorous study of epistemology, evolutionary developmental neurobiology, comparative cognition, and specifically a framework called predictive processing.
Let's break down predictive processing, because I think this is the mechanical bridge between the Lancaster Desert and the algorithm.
It absolutely is.
Historically, the layperson's understanding of the brain is that it's a passive receiver. We think our eyes and ears act like cameras and microphones, just recording the outside world and sending that tape to the brain to be viewed.
But predictive processing completely flips that model. It suggests the brain is actually an active inference machine.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
It means the brain is constantly generating top-down predictions about what it expects to encounter in the world. It uses sensory input from the eyes and ears not to build a picture from scratch, but merely to correct its own predictions when it encounters an error.
Wait, so your reality is essentially a highly controlled hallucination generated by your brain, constrained only by sensory feedback.
That's exactly it.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But if the human brain operates by constantly predicting the next piece of sensory data based on a massive internal model of past experiences, then the mechanics of an artificial intelligence, specifically large language models, look incredibly familiar.
Oh, for sure.
An LLM operates by analyzing massive data sets and mathematically predicting the next most likely token or word in a sequence. It's an inference machine.
Precisely. To a neuroscientist studying how the biological brain predicts and constructs reality, an AI is not just a corporate surveillance tool or a job killer for the gig economy.
It's something much deeper.
It is a fascinating, functional mirror of human cognition. It is a mechanical attempt to replicate the exact inference processes Luke has spent his academic career studying.
This scientific fascination completely forces us to reevaluate what Five Starcle Men actually was from the very beginning. If we read the database closely, was FSM ever really just a human band playing guitars?
That's the million-dollar question. The database explicitly refers to FSM as a hyperstition generator.
For those unfamiliar with the term, a hyperstition is essentially a fiction that makes itself real. It's an idea or a narrative so powerful that by simply talking about it, believing in it, and creating art around it, it begins to manifest in reality.
It actively alters the behavior of the people engaging with it.
And the fiction FSM was generating was incredibly dark and complex. The lore of the band explicitly involves, and I'm quoting the archive here, kids being tortured, raped, and controlled by aliens until they became one with those very same aliens.
Luke even referred to himself as a paranoiac and a Starcle fascist.
Yeah, the music and art were constantly exploring themes of mind control and what he called human-alien non-dualism.
Non-dualism in this context means the complete erasure of the boundary between the human self and the alien other. They were obsessed with alien transmissions coming through the desert air of Lancaster.
Which makes sense, since Lancaster was an Air Force town where half the population worked on secret military projects.
Right, so FSM was always an exercise in the tension between human autonomy and external control.
In a 2015 note from the database, Luke describes all of reality as an influencing and influenced cockpit. If FSM was always about the tension between human memories and alien overcoding, then AI is the perfect mechanical instrument for this project.
It moves FSM from a metaphorical project to a literal one. In the 1990s, Luke and Glenn used analog tape loops and distortion pedals to try and mimic what they thought aliens sounded like. They were playing a part.
But today, Luke is taking that exact same archival history and feeding it into an actual non-human intelligence.
The database talks about the Starcle Mammy, which the lore describes as fifth-dimensional aliens that human beings are merely an overcoding of.
So by using AI to deconstruct FSM, Luke is allowing a non-human entity to overcode his human memories in real time. The AI isn't a betrayal of the band's aesthetic. The AI is the Starcle Manny made manifest.
He is actualizing the hyperstition he and Glenn created 30 years ago.
It is a stunning evolution of performance art, but it brings us to a severe philosophical and ethical crossroads.
We have two conflicting realities here. Conceptually and scientifically, AI is the perfect tool for FSM's alien aesthetic.
But politically and economically, according to the Jacobin framework and Luke's own leftist roots, AI is a planetary threat designed to crush the working class.
So what should Luke do?
And how should you, as a listener and a fan, understand his output? Specifically, should Luke cease making these AI podcasts? Podcasts that sound exactly like this very deep dive we are doing right now.
Well, if Luke follows the logic of the Jacobin article, he should align with the local communities mentioned in the text who are enacting emergency pauses on server farms. He should pump the brakes immediately.
Ceasing the AI podcast would preserve the raw, emotional legacy of his childhood friendship with Glenn.
We really have to remember that Glenn tragically passed away. The source material includes a beautiful, deeply human tribute read at his wake.
Yeah, it talks about his BMX stunts in the backyard, building dirt chunks with his dad, whittling wood by the campfire, and his incredibly gentle artistic nature.
If Luke stops feeding the archive to the machine, he preserves that purely human memory. He keeps the childhood time capsule safely buried in the dirt.
But if we look at Luke's later projects in the database, he has been conceptually driving toward this exact technological collision for a long time.
Oh, definitely. In 2013, he started work on a project titled The Lil Neuro and Air Buddies Supercomputer Existence Terror.
He has been exploring the intersection of cognitive terror and supercomputers for over a decade. Stopping now would mean abandoning a philosophical inquiry he has spent his entire adult life building toward.
Is this his ultimate death trap? Will the hardcore FSM fans, the people who actually traded those limited edition Xerox cassettes in the 90s, abandon him completely because they see him crossing a picket line of human creativity?
By feeding the band into a machine and churning out AI analysis, does he end FSM's relevance as a beloved underground band forever?
It is almost certainly the death of FSM as a traditional underground band.
Yeah, I think so too.
The era of tactile cassettes and garage punk nostalgia is over. But it is simultaneously the birth of FSM as a vast postmodern database.
Luke is sacrificing the comfort of nostalgia to conduct a real-time scientific and cultural experiment on his own life's work.
He is prioritizing the pursuit of knowledge, testing the boundaries of cognition, influence, and reality, over preserving a static 1990s legacy.
Let's recap this incredible collision of ideas for everyone listening. We started with a pressing political reality. progressive leaders trying to stop a hungry species of artificial intelligence from draining municipal water supplies, straining electrical grids, and hollowing out the workforce.
And we collided that global political tension with the incredibly intimate story of a working class kid from the California desert.
A kid who went from drawing paper airplanes and drinking cough syrup with his best friend to becoming a neuroscientist who is now willingly letting an artificial intelligence devour his childhood art to see what the algorithm spits back out.
It forces us to question where the boundary between human creativity and artificial generation actually lies, especially when the artist in question has spent his entire life arguing that the boundary was an illusion to begin with.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering question for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends. We explored Luke's field of predictive processing, the scientifically grounded idea that the human brain is essentially just an inference machine, constantly trying to predict the next sensory input to survive. If the human brain is ultimately just a biological algorithm running prediction models, maybe Luke's use of AI isn't a betrayal of his human roots at all.
Right.
What if, by throwing that childhood time capsule into the digital kaleidoscope of AI, Luke is trying to prove that the aliens he and Glenn were so obsessed with in the 1990s weren't actually coming from outer space?
Or just the mechanical algorithms waiting inside our own heads the whole time.
Exactly.